So I've been asked about who my favorite authors are, and I thought I'd just give you a selection. It's not in any way comprehensive, but I thought there are a few things that might interest you regarding my favorite authors. So we start off with this gentleman here, and that's Rudolf Weiss. So let's go back to the early 1980s. I was a young, recent graduate of my herbal studies, and I decided to do a fact-finding tour of Europe, and especially Germany, because at that stage, and even to some extent now, Germany was the home of Western herbal medicine. So I visited many naturopaths and indeed many medical doctors, all of whom called themselves phytotherapists. And every one of them had in their consulting room to refer to what we can translate as a textbook of herbal medicine, but forgive my German, it was Lehrbuch de Phytotherapie, written by Rudolf Weiss. Now, the thing about Weiss's book, as it was then, was only available in German. So it was incredibly frustrating for me because I really wanted access to that information. Fortunately, several years later, an English translation came out. And then what happened, of course, is they decided to update. Weiss passed away, and they decided to update to a new edition. And so all of the, evidence-based writers got in, and they turned it from what was just a wonderful narrative book about herbs and their properties into something, much more sterile with, monographic reviews and what have you. Not that I'm against monographic reviews, I do them, of course, but the whole point was that beauty and that narrative had been lost. But fortunately, it was actually preserved, and you see that's what it looks like. That's called I believe the classical edition. So 1985, actually, the translation came out. So actually shortly after I was wandering around Germany. And that book is still something I refer to. And recently I gave a talk on bitters, and I referred to Weiss for what you could regard as a traditional Western view of bitters and how they stimulate your gastric juice secretion. But Weiss also said they had general tonic action, and they do improve appetite, probably due to circulation in abdominal organs. Now, the science now shows that bitters actually depress appetite in someone who's well fed, but this would be in someone who's emaciated. That was what the herbal tradition was seeing. And that the effects of bitters were not just limited to the stomach, and he gave reference to their use in constipation and other areas. And it just contains so many wonderful anecdotes about these very sick, emaciated patient, for example, who was in a hospital in, I think, Austria, who actually craved bitter herbs because their body almost knew it was good for them. So if you're not familiar with the classical edition of Herbal Medicine by Rudolf Weiss, I suggest you have a look. It's a wonderful read. And then I cannot talk on this topic without referring to the eclectic writers. They were writers who greatly influenced me. And you're talking here about people who were active in the late 19th and early 20th century. And there are two key textbooks that I've listed there. They're both available either as hardcover reprints, or you can even find PDFs of them online, or partial PDFs that give you access to certain areas. The eclectics used minerals and used other things as well. So quite often what you will find will be a selected content that refers just to the herbal part. Now, I have to say, when I was just a recent graduate and I started reading Allingwood and Lloyd and Felter and Lloyd, those two books about echinacea, there it is behind me, it turned it into my favorite herb. It was the eclectics who opened my eyes to the value of the traditional understanding of echinacea. And there's still some wonderful, wonderful insights. For example, they said wild yam, because at that time they didn't have an understanding of the steroidal saponins and what have you. So wild yam was being used as a spasmolytic, and it really does have that property. And, you know, I've put that together in a formula, for example, where people are getting spasm of all kinds, not just uterine spasm, and it really works. And that came from the eclectics. And another amusing one is stone root. So if you look at the British Herbal Pharmacopoeia 1983, you'll find stone root, good for kidney stones and good for gallstones. Oh, stone root, actually. But when you go back and read the eclectics on stone root, you realize that is a misinformation that got perpetuated. Someone lost the plot and told the wrong story, and it got perpetuated because the stone root was called so because it's really hard. I remember my herb teacher, Heinz Zelstra, complaining that it destroyed one of his hammer mills when he was trying to break it up. It was that hard. That's why it's stone root. Nothing to do with gallstones and kidney stones. And if you read what the eclectics write about stone root, you'll find they refer to it as being good for the veins. And given those saponins we know it contains, that is entirely credible. So what about modern writers? Well, I'm sure many of you know this handsome gentleman here, Simon Mills. And Simon is a wonderful writer, and you should buy all his old texts because, again, they have that beautiful narrative in them. And he translated those skills into, of course, the textbooks that I've co-written with him, Essential Guide to Herbal Safety, and especially, of course, Principles and Practice of Phytotherapy. And so if you're reading through Principles and Practice of Phytotherapy and you see something, oh, that's so eloquently and beautifully written, that's probably the Simon Mills part because he is just a wonderful writer. And I'd like to also mention an unsung hero of herbal writing, and that is Michelle Morgan, whom I've worked with over several decades now. And Michelle contributed to the textbooks that I've just mentioned, Principles of Practice and Essential Guide to Herbal Safety. And she still currently writes the herbal monographs for the MediHerb brand. And you know, it's worth signing up to the website just to get access to those monographs because they're so thoroughly and robustly researched. And the other thing that Michelle does is she produces a herb-drug interaction table, and it's updated every 12 to 18 months. And it is just the best, most accurate, rational source of credible, clinically relevant herb-drug interactions. I've done a webinar on this topic and I'll probably do more, but there's so much misinformation on herb-drug interactions. And to be honest, it's the chart that Michelle Morgan produces, I believe, is the only consistently and broadly reliable source for herb-drug interactions. Okay, so let's move beyond herbs and let's have a look at some other writers that I like. And one of them is Norman Doidge, who's written about neuroplastic brain healing. And as you can see, he's a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. And he has popularized this concept of neuroplasticity. And that's been hugely influential for me in how I manage patients with, you know, complex brain disorders and the like, but just in my general thinking about life and how we learn and how we adapt. So he's written two key books, The Brain That Changes Itself and The Brain's Way of Healing. Now, just a little alert for those of you who might be put off. He is very pro animal research, and some of you might find that a little bit off-putting here and there in the book. So if you want to get the gist of what Norman Doidge is about, there's an excellent interview with him over many pages that Robert Roundtree wrote in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. I think its name's changed, but you should be able to find it. It's Rountree. And it's really quite brilliant and encapsulates what's in those two books, and especially what a clinician needs to know without the monkey stuff. So, and speaking of that, I should mention Robert Roundtree. So I was in Texas, in Austin, Texas, and I was giving a seminar there, and people coming up to me and say, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And when the seminar finished, a lot of people stayed in the room, and I was told, "Get out of here." And I was saying, "What's going on?" "Ah, there's another seminar happening." And so Mark Blumenthal was there, and he said, "Hey, come and I'll introduce to the speaker of the next seminar." And it was Robert Roundtree. And I said to Robert, "I'm so pleased to meet you. You are one of my favorite writers." So anything by Robert Roundtree you can get is worth looking at. He's an integrative medical practitioner. So he writes more broadly than just about herbs, but he does have good herbal knowledge as well. And then the final writer I'd like to talk about is Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. And I think this is the best popular science, medical science book that's been written for a long time. It's just a wonderful book, and it just blows you away what we now understand about the science of sleep and dreams. It's completely revolutionary, and he goes through some amazing topics, like talking about how, birds, for example, when birds sleep, because, they want to avoid predators, one half of the brain sleeps and the other half stays awake with their eye looking around to see, and then swap over, and the other half of the brain sleeps, and so on. So it's just a wonderful revelation and really enjoyable read. He has such a good writing style. So I do recommend that book to you as well. Now, there are others, but I thought in the limits of time, just some nice little cameos and snapshots for you on this topic of my favorite writers.